He ripped the envelope open so hard the seal screamed. Paper burst, a glossy photo slid free, and the courtroom air thinned to a blade. His lips moved once, twice, as if he could out-talk what he saw. Then he found his voice. The old, commanding baritone cracked down to a boy, and the single word tore out of him, long and raw, "No!" The rain that morning didn't fall. It drilled. It came sideways off the bay, needling the glass, turning the steps to slick slate. I parked by the war memorial and let the wipers finish one last sweep. Bronze names beaded with water like they were sweating through roll call. My dress whites held their lined starch habit spine. Across the street, the county courthouse looked like a cleaned-up church, white columns, a flag held flat by wind-glass doors, reflecting more gray than sky. A man in a John Deere cap held the door for his wife. The warmth swallowed them both. My name is Elise Morgan, 37, Navy. The letters above my left pocket say, Morgan, the only part of the family I still wear. The rest I left on a porch 20 years ago when my father decided a daughter who chose mud and duty over parties and posture was no daughter of his. I stepped into the rain without an umbrella. It slapped my face like a drill instructor. Inside the lobby was coffee warm and sawdust bright. A bulletin board sagged under flyers for fishing licenses and a VFW pancake breakfast. A deputy with kind eyes pointed down the hall. Estate reading, B. He clocked the uniform and let me keep it. That's how a real town works. People notice and decide not to make a show of it. I sat and set my palms on my knees, thumbs flat like holding a map, steady in wind. The last time I waited for my father, I was 18, in a thrift store skirt with a hope already fraying. He arrived late on purpose. Today, he was early. Richard Morgan came in under a sweep of dry air like rain knew better than to touch him. New suit, old posture, the hinge of his jaw working the way it does when he thinks an apology is circling and he might have to shoot it. At his elbow, Linda floated Pearl's neat hair, a mouth that could cut a ribbon and a person. He looked at me, the way attorneys look at a witness inventory angles leverage. No flinch, no greeting. He spent 2 decades practicing how not to see me and wasn't about to give it up in a lobby. Commander, the bailiff said. I stood. The word lands different when you've earned it in rooms where no one wanted you to. I followed the line into courtroom B. Small-town courtrooms smell like polish and damp coats. This one had pew benches, and a state seal hung a degree off level. The judge's face was weathered and kindly mean. At counsel table sat Grace Whitmore, with a leather folio and folded hands. She grew up 2 houses down from my mother. My father clapped at her bar oath like the stage was his. She was the executor now. If she knew where the good dishes were, she knew where the signatures lived. On the matter of the estate of Margaret Ellis, Morgan, the clerk read vowels local. Rain ratcheted higher against the glass. Grace rose. My father did too, laying 2 fingers on the table as if it needed his balance. People think the military teaches you to bark. Mostly, it teaches you to breathe. In training, I learned to turn panic into a 4-count box. In through the nose. Hold. Out through the mouth. Hold. Courtrooms require the same math. On paper, the will was simple. A marsh house. 3 decades of school nurse savings jewelry with more story than resale. What made the air different was the sealed envelope Grace had mentioned 2 nights ago in my mother's kitchen. She wrote a personal letter to be read aloud. Grace had said, eyes soft behind her glasses. She was very clear. Appearances were taken. My father added Esquire as if the room might forget. His voice sounded like a man ordering breakfast he'd already decided wasn't good enough. Grace began the standard language sound, mind-revoking prior wills, and the rhythm of law settled like a metronome you could lean against. I watched a droplet fatten on the edge of the window and let go. Before allocations, Grace said Mrs. Morgan directed a letter be read into the record. She set a cream envelope on the table, my mother's slanted hand spelling my name like a benediction. My father smiled the way men do when they see a stage prop they believe they can use. Let's not delay the inevitable, he said. We all know what Margaret would have wanted. He looked at me when he said her name as if it were a password he alone possessed. "Mr. Morgan," the judge said mildly, which in bench speak means, "We'll do this by the book if it kills you. Counsel will proceed." Grace slid the envelope to center. The rain softened to a steady drum like a parade we hadn't earned. For a breath, I saw my mother's hands capable, lotion soft, the faint burn scar from the pan she refused to discard because it could still do its job. I heard her the night I shipped out. "You don't have to prove anything. Just be the thing." My father reached. Even his reach was a speech. He didn't ask, didn't wait. He took, because most of his life, the world stepped back when he leaned forward. The paper rasped under his nail. He turned it like a puzzle thumb over the flap. His wedding band flashed. "Objection," Linda whispered. "Because some people believe if you use a courtroom word, you get a courtroom power." The judge lifted an eyebrow. My father tore. The sound wasn't loud, but it cut. For half a second, every set of lungs made the same decision hold. That was the hinge. The hush right before the photo slid out glossy and undeniable, and the life he'd refused to look at finally looked back. I didn't move. Discipline isn't just for the field. Sometimes it's the difference between surviving a memory and living it once. I set my hands palm down, even the way you do on the gunnel before you stand. This time, I wasn't here for his approval. I was here for the truth. The flap split a damp sound that made everybody's shoulders lift a quarter inch. The cream edge feathered under his thumbs. For a beat, nothing moved except the rain stitching its small needles into the windows until the glass itself seemed to breathe. "Counsel," the judge warned gently, as if to remind the room that paper could be heavier than it looked. Grace kept her voice even. As directed by Mrs. Morgan, the letter is to be read into the record after identification. My father didn't wait for anyone to identify anything. He shook the envelope once impatient proprietary, and a glossy square slid toward the lip of the table. His hand hovered above it, uncertain which instinct to obey, catch it, or let the world do the dropping for him. Mr. Morgan Linda whispered an arrow disguised as lace. "You're on camera." She meant the eyes. She meant the town. I felt the courtroom flare, and then dim like a heart monitor when the room goes quiet to hear the next beat. You can hear your blood when you've been in enough tight places. This had that sound. Before the photo settled, my mind did what minds do under pressure. It cut to the last time a door had opened between us and swallowed everything we hadn't said. 18. Porch light. June air like hot chalk. He stood with his arms folded, and a certainty so polished you could see yourself get smaller in it. "A Morgan doesn't crawl in mud," he said, pronouncing Marines as if it were a typo I'd made in a family letter. He didn't say stay. He didn't say don't go. He turned, and the door made that soft hush a door makes when it has done this before. Sometimes I wonder whether he practiced it in his head, how to step over a daughter without looking like he had. A bailiff coughed, and the years snapped back. Courtroom B, state seal. The soft whir of the HVAC filling the space between a father and the truth. The photo finished its small slide and rested against the wood with a click that only I seemed to hear. My father didn't look down. He looked at me, letting the distance do the speaking. 20 years gone, he said, each word buffed to courtroom shine, and this is what you became. The sneer tried to wear a smile and failed. The baritone he used for juries frayed on the edges. He glanced at the judge calibrating, always calibrating, and then at the handful of faces in the pews. People from our town sit like they sit in church bodies folded to take up as little space as possible, while their eyes take up all of it. Some had come because they cared. Some had come because caring looks the same as curiosity from the parking lot. "Proceed, Ms. Whitmore," the judge said. "Let the record reflect." The record can reflect after we all see what farce Margaret signed off on my father, said, one finger flattening the corner of the photo as if this finally was a thing he could control with pressure. He barely touched it, but even that small contact seemed to go up his arm like a warning. Grace didn't take the bait. "Your Honor," Mrs. Morgan's instructions were explicit. Then let's be explicit. My father shot back charming when he needed to be sharper, when he thought he could win with the cut. She wanted order. She despised theatrics. Which is why the judge said voice quiet, but with weight under it, we will follow her order. Ms. Whitmore read, when you are prepared. Grace nodded. She didn't reach for the photo. She reached for the letter that was still inside the torn mouth of the envelope, pinched it by its edge, the way people handle things that matter, careful, unfussy, no flourish. The paper came free with a small sigh, and for an instant, I smelled my mother's kitchen lemon's wool, the old pan with the scar she refused to hide. My father's gaze broke. He looked down. There are moments that ring like struck metal. The room had that tone as his eyes found the image. He didn't react at first. He squinted as if expecting the picture to rearrange itself into a story that fit the shape he had made for it. He leaned forward. The wedding band flashed again. The muscle in his cheek jumped once a small defect in the old machine. The bailiff shifted his weight. Someone in the second row drew in a breath too quick and clamped it down with a cough. Outside, the rain steadied as if on purpose. Identification. The judge asked the word, a bridge for anyone who needed one. Grace answered without looking at the photo. The court will see attached a formal portrait and cover sheet bearing the subject's rank, assignment, and date. Linda craned for a look and couldn't quite get an angle. She settled for reading my father's face like a caption. He put one thumb on the bottom edge and nudged the glossy square a fingertip closer to him. Not possessive, not yet. He hadn't decided what story the room was going to get. You think this impresses me, he said to the table, to me, to the wood, to time itself. Uniforms impress boys. Men read records. My voice felt like a tool I hadn't needed in months. I picked it up anyway, kept it dull and straight. Read the record then. His eyes flicked to mine, fast, unwilled and away. There was something newly fragile about the pivot. He settled back into the thing he knows best posture. His knee crossed. His fingers tapped once, a habit from his opening statements used to sound like certainty. It sounded like a knock now, as if he were asking to be let back into a house that already had an occupant. Grace lifted the letter, aligning the edges on an invisible plumb line, before speaking. For the record, she said, this is a personal letter from the decedent Mrs. Margaret Ellis Morgan, to be read aloud at this proceeding prior to distribution. Make it quick, my father said. And even he heard what it sounded like, a man rushing the dead because the living was starting to hurt. The judge didn't look at him. Proceed. Grace's voice did not try for importance. It simply honored the syllables. My dearest Elise, she read, if this is being read, I am where I can hear the gulls without getting cold. I am wearing the shawl you always teased me about. I am thinking of your hands and the way you set a cup down without noise. You learned that in a house where loud was mistaken for strong. The words moved like a tide forward, steady and different to anyone's approval. I watched them land on Linda and bead on the surface on the judge and soak in on my father and disappear into the old ground without leaving anything green. Before we make a ledger of things, Grace read, let us make a ledger of truths. Your father chose performance over honesty, control over care. I tried to love him into a better choice. Love alone cannot do that work. Linda's smile tightened until it was geometry. My father's breathing changed in the way a runner's does when a hill reveals itself. I didn't feel triumph, not even relief, just a bone-level recognition that someone else finally wrote down the thing I had been holding up by myself for 2 decades. It's strangely quiet when a weight you've trained for has another set of hands under it. Mrs. Whitmore, my father said, words, clipping this editorializing. These are your late wife's words, the judge said. Grace turned the page carefully. The letter's fold left a line across the paper, like a horizon you could rest a finger on. She didn't read the next part yet. She let the silence do its job, not to humiliate, but to clear. Your Honor, she said at last. With the court's leave before the text continues, identification of the attached photograph and cover sheet would be appropriate. The judge inclined his head. Identify it. Grace looked to me not for permission, but for respect. I gave a small nod. Let the record reflect. Let the town that watched us pretend know which parts were play. She placed 2 fingertips on the glossy square and turned it toward the bench. Even upside down, I knew the shapes, shoulder lines, collar points, the geometry of a life spent getting the little things right, so the big ones don't kill you. Silver caught the light. Ink spelled what light could not. My father's hand twitched again, not towards the photo this time, but away from it, as if a small heat had pushed back through the finish into his skin. He stared, and for a heartbeat, his mouth forgot what to do with itself. He was a man mid-sentence, with no place to put his next consonant. He swallowed and found safety in an old trick attack the premise. Anyone can rent a uniform, he said hoarsely. Women like costumes. Mr. Morgan, the judge said. Grace did not look at him. She looked at the court. The cover sheet bears assignment details, service dates, and rank. It states, quote, My father's chair creaked under him. He was suddenly very still, the kind of still that only comes from someone who has realized motion will betray the thing he's trying to hide. I breathed my 4 counts. In, hold, out, hold. The rain halved itself and settled into a rhythm even our old house would have recognized. The town watched. The letter waited. The truth was at the edge of the table, ready to speak in a voice older than any of ours. Grace held the photo at a respectful angle, as if it might bruise, and waited for the court reporter to catch up. The keys clicked like rain on tin. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench, palms tented. He had the look of a man who'd watched enough families turn the law into a mirror and then swear the reflection was someone else's fault. Mark the photograph and cover sheet as Exhibit A, he said. The clerk rose, took the glossy square and the attached page, and slid them into a clear sleeve with the care of a church usher carrying a candle. My father was still, but it was the kind of still that happens right before a dog bolts the muscles all coiled in one direction without admitting it. Linda's perfume reached across the table, lilac and something sharper. She lifted her chin the way people do when they think dignity is a pose you can hold. Grace didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She had been at our kitchen table when my mother's hands trembled around the pen. She knew what the paper weighed. She put the letter down a moment, pressed her fingertips to its crease, and then lifted it again. Your Honor, she said with the court's permission, the decedent's letter should be read before distribution. Proceed, the judge answered. I watched the clerk settle headset, tilted fingers poised. The room shrank to a cone of listening. Even the HVAC seemed to lower its voice. Grace read plainly, like someone offering bread Richard Elise. If this is being read, I'm past the part where breath tires me. I'll be direct. I failed at one thing for too long. I defended a story because I loved the person telling it. My father's mouth twitched, then steadied into the flat line he wore at deposition tables. Editorial, he said, not quite under his breath. The judge didn't look at him. Let it be read. A house can teach you the wrong definitions if you don't correct them, Grace continued. We called loud, strong, quiet, weak control care. We called a daughter defiant when she was brave and a son destined when he was simply loved. I was complicit in those wrong names because love makes cowards of mothers when it should make them brave. The sentence landed and sat heavy without cruelty. The wood of the table felt warmer under my palms. There's a relief that hurts. It's the body letting go of a weight it had learned to carry as identity. Grace turned the page. The paper made a soft rasp like cord unfurling. Before we put numbers to what I leave, she read, we must be honest about what was taken. Time listening, the right to be seen without arguing first. Richard, you loved performing goodness more than doing it. I know you'll bristle at that. I bristled every time my own mother said it to me. A quiet buzz rose from the pews and died. Towns understand this kind of sentence. They have watched men like my father hand over a check at the pancake breakfast and take a piece of someone's life in the parking lot. My father adjusted his cufflink as if it had asked permission to be there. Your Honor, none of this? It all bears on intent, the judge said, his voice the timbre of a man who had lost a friend and learned to speak in shorter words. Grace went on. Elise, I was proud when you were 6 and read the names off the memorial without skipping the hard ones. I was proud when you were 12 and showed up to shovel Mrs. Olson's steps before anyone else. I was proud when you were 18 and chose a road I feared because you believed you could do some good. I did not say these things often enough. I am saying them now out loud with the law listening. I let my breath out through my teeth. Linda looked at me quickly and away as if catching a person in the grocery store aisle taking the better tomatoes. The judge nodded toward Grace's hand. Continue. As for the ledger, the house on Marsh Road, the savings and retirement, the jewelry and the journals, these to be distributed as attached. But there is also the matter of recognition. Grace paused not for drama, but because the next line required a careful landing. I have asked that a photograph be attached to this letter, and that the court take notice of who my daughter is not just who she was. The clerk slid Exhibit A back across to the bench. The judge kept his face unreadable, but his eyes softened at the corners. He lifted the clear sleeve reed silently for a moment and set it down with a small, precise motion that said, I understand the world you came through. My father's voice found a ledge. If this is some stunt, Mr. Morgan, the judge warned, but gently, like speaking to a veteran whose hearing was newer broken than he admitted. The rain leaned harder. It had the steady insistence of a marching band 3 blocks away, the kind you can't see, yet only feel in the reverberations. Grace's eyes returned to the letter. Richard, if you're in the room, listen without arguing. Your anger is not a fact. It's a habit. If you've never managed to say, I'm sorry to our daughter, let the court's hearing be where you learn another sentence. I was wrong. Linda's fingers tightened on her clutch. The tiny leather creaked. I chose to be plain in writing because I could not be plain in our living, Grace read. You filled the house with reasons. I filled it with quiet. Quiet is not consent. It was survival. I hope Elise never has to choose between love and truth in the way I did. For the first time since we entered, my father's eyes flicked toward me and stayed. They did not ask for approval. They looked for foothold. I did not give him one. I have learned that sometimes mercy is letting a person find the ground that is actually under their feet. Grace set the letter down for a breath and faced the bench. Your Honor, the remainder of the will addresses property and accounts in ordinary order. The decedent also left a memorandum of personal effects with specific bequests. With the court's leave, the letter's final paragraphs can be read before allocations. Aloud, the judge said. The bailiff shifted to relieve a knee. A boy in the last pew whispered something to his grandmother. She put a hand on his arm without looking away from the front. People learn reverence in rooms like this, even if they don't have a word for it. Grace lifted the last page. The corner had a smudge the exact shape of my mother's thumb. Elise, she read, you do not need anything I own to keep dignity. But if things can buy you time, take the time. Spend it on the life you build, not on convincing anyone who profits by staying unconvinced. If you accept my estate, do it as an act of stewardship, not triumph. If you decline it, let the Willow Creek Literacy Foundation take what remains and make stories in rooms for girls who need a lamp when the house is small. The foundation name drew a small stir. Every county has one place, like that brick and books, and a volunteer who smells like spearmint and stamped dates. Richard, Grace read, and the sound of his name in that tone made the hair on my arms lift. There is a portrait of your father in the study. You always admired how it looked. Take it. Hang it where you can see the cost of mistaking legacy for permission. My father's jaw worked and then held. He cleared his throat and managed a scoff that didn't quite know it was a sob trying to stand up straight. Now, to the matter of distribution, Grace said, closing the letter with her palm. The remainder shall be allocated as in Section 5, subsequent to this letter's being read into the record and Exhibit A identified. The judge turned to the clerk. Read the identification on the cover sheet for the record. The clerk adjusted the headset and lifted the page. The room leaned forward a fraction, not theatrically, just the lean people make, when a truth they've avoided is about to get a name and therefore a body. Cover sheet. The clerk read voice, careful. Formal portrait, subject Elise Morgan. Rank and assignment as listed. Date. Enough! My father snapped louder than he meant, softer than he thought. The sound hit the paneled walls and came back smaller. He stared at the sleeve as if it might spit. Mr. Morgan, the judge said, firmer now. He shut his mouth. You could see the boy in him, the one punished for crying in a house that didn't have room for it. Grace placed the letter atop the folio like a folded flag. Your Honor, with the court's permission, we'll proceed to the allocations in Order House accounts, personal effects after the record reflects the contents of Exhibit A. The judge nodded once. Let the record reflect fully. He turned to the clerk again. Please read the subject identification as written. The clerk looked down, lips moving once in rehearsal. The rain softened as if even the storm had taken a seat. A breath held the room, the kind that feels like a hand on the back between the shoulder blades steadying or warning you can't know until the next second. I set my palms flat and squared my shoulders. I have walked into darker rooms than this one. I have learned that the moment before a truth speaks is where a person decides what kind of person they will be when it does. The clerk cleared her throat, then read the line you can't put back once it's spoken. Subject Elise Morgan. Rank Rear Admiral, lower half. Assignment Naval Special Warfare Command. The words hit with the dull weight of a gavel you feel in your ribs. Marked and received, the judge said. Grace angled the photograph toward the bench, then the room, not parading it, simply letting it exist where denial usually sits. 2 silver stars at my shoulders. White dress coat cut clean the caption block. Fixing what the service insists must be fixed. Name, rank, command date. My father's mouth arranged itself into the old smirk and couldn't hold. A small muscle near his left eye fluttered. Proceed with the letter, the judge said. Grace lifted the page. Her voice went exact. Richard. She read, the daughter you cast out became what you once imagined your son might be. I am not writing to shame you in public, only to stop letting your story be the only one told in this house. This is Elise, a woman who did the work and kept her word when we were too proud to keep ours. Linda made a small hinge sound. My father stayed still, but the stillness had changed. It wasn't control anymore, just absence. Grace went on. Elise, if you are in the room, breathe. You do not have to carry anyone while the truth stands up. I am sorry for the years I called your courage disobedience. I was afraid of what your courage would cost me. It cost me you. I am trying to give you back some time. The clerk's keys slowed. I counted my 4 beats. In, hold, out, hold. Photos can be staged, my father said to no one in particular. People play dress up. Grace addressed the bench. The court also has certification from Navy Personnel Command attesting to rank and assignment. She set a stamped page on the corner. So reflected, the judge said. Something gave in my father's face. He touched the sleeve with one finger, tapping once tick as if testing whether the world still answered to him. He finally looked at me, not at metal or cloth, at me. Proceed, the judge prompted softly. Grace found the last paragraph. As to the estate, she read, I leave what I have to the child who kept honor when none was offered to Elise. If she declines, let it go to Willow Creek Literacy, the library that kept me safe when noise pretended to be love. Richard, I leave you the portrait of your father. Hang it where you will see it when you talk about legacy. Let it remind you that legacy is not permission. It is responsibility. No one applauded. My father stood. Your Honor, I will contest undue influence. She was ill. The execution date is 6 weeks prior, Grace said. 2 witnesses, notarized, medical clearance attached. On what grounds, the judge asked, polite as a locked door. My father's mouth opened closed. He needed a stage. The law kept handing him a ledger. He turned to the pews. He found faces Mrs. Olson, from church, the bait shop owner, the teacher who'd written me a recommendation, and discovered nobody was reading his lines back to him. He drew the sleeve closer and read the caption block aloud. The baritone thinned. Rear Admiral, lower half. Naval Special Warfare Command. His lips tried to outrun the meaning. They failed. Linda touched his elbow. He shook her off. He searched the gloss for a seam, a stitch he could pull to make the world return to the version where he was architect, and I was still a blueprint he'd crumpled. There was no seam. Something rigid inside him met something immovable outside him, and meeting made a sound. No, he said, too small for the room. He tried again, louder. No. The third time entered that register, people hit when the story they've rented to themselves gets evicted. It wasn't theatrical. It was ugly, human, and young. No! The sound scraped the varnish. The clerk missed the last 3 O's and then flustered typed 4 more. The judge lifted a hand. Order. My father's shoulders rounded. He sat like someone had sawed 3 inches off the legs while he stood. He set the photograph down carefully, as if breaking it would break whatever dignity he had left. I did not feel like winning. I felt like weather finally moving on from a stalled front. Counsel, the judge said. Allocations. Yes, Your Honor. Grace squared the folio. House on Marsh Road to Elise. Savings and retirement to Elise. Personal journals to Elise. Portrait of Mr. Morgan's father to Richard. Contingency to Willow Creek literacy should Elise decline. My father found one last thing to throw. You always wanted to humiliate me, he said to the wood grain. I wanted you to see me, I said. That is different. The judge wrote with a fountain pen. Linda looked at me, not with triumph or pity, just the alertness of someone realizing she's on the rim of a hole she didn't know was there. The rain eased. Lights hummed. Somewhere in the hallway, a vending machine dropped a soda with the thunk of a heart returning to regular work. Grace finished the list. Modest things, heavy with years, a house that smelled like Tide and lemon oil, accounts that would buy time more than luxury letters that mattered more than jewelry. The words for girls who need a lamp traveled to the back row and stayed. Accepted, the judge said. The will and letter are received into the record. I set my hands in my lap and let my shoulders drop the inch they'd been holding on principle. The photo lay 3 feet away, face-up proof and portrait both. My father did not touch it again. Silence holds different weights. In courtroom B, it settled like a wool coat after a storm. Scratchy warming, impossible to pretend you didn't feel it. The judge capped his pen, the small click like a metronome finding its beat again. We'll move to acknowledgments, he said. Ms. Morgan. Every eye turned. My father kept his on the table, the photograph parked just beyond his fingertips like a hot plate he'd learned not to touch. I stood. The coat tugged clean at my shoulders. Your Honor, I said, voice steady, the way you learn to make it steady when wind means trouble, not weather. I acknowledge the allocations as written. I also decline the house and accounts. Even the lights seemed to sharpen. Linda's head jerked. In the back pew, Mrs. Olson's knitting paused mid-loop. Grace didn't blink. She had sat at our kitchen table enough times to know what my mother meant by stewardship, not triumph. To be clear for the record, she said gently, Ms. Morgan accepts the journals and personal effects directed specifically to her. She declines the residuary estate. Under Section 5, the contingency clause transfers the remainder to Willow Creek Literacy Foundation. So reflected, the judge said. He didn't try to hide the way his mouth softened. Ms. Morgan, do you decline freely and knowingly? Yes, Your Honor. My father looked up, then anger scrambling to its feet, relief rubbing its eyes, pride pretending it hadn't fallen. You're grandstanding, he said, tired venom, finding an old groove. You want the town to see a saint. No, I said. I want a lamp lit for girls who need one. I nodded toward Exhibit A, not the photo, but the letter. She asked for that. The judge inclined his head. The court accepts the declination and directs the residue as provided. I sat. The bench wood felt warmer than before, as if the building had decided I belonged to its weather. In a different room years earlier, a different silence had followed a different sentence. Afghanistan. A corrugated iron roof, midday heat that made air feel poured. A father across the world who would return my letter unopened. Don't waste postage, he'd written on the flap, his secretary's neat hand masking his refusal. That day, I learned how to crack a knot with breath alone. In, hold, out, hold. Then I wrote another letter this time, to no one in particular. I choose the work. I tucked it in a cargo pocket and carried it 6 months, sweating the ink into something like resolve. Ms. Whitmore, the judge prompted. 2 final matters, Grace said. 1 delivery of journals to Elise Morgan today. 2 delivery of the portrait of Mr. Morgan's father to Richard Morgan upon adjournment. The word portrait lifted my father's chin. He needed something to hold. Legacy tends to throw ropes to the man who learned to climb them. Fine, he said too quickly. We'll be done then. Almost the judge answered. His eyes found my father's, not unkind, not indulgent. Mr. Morgan, the court notes your outburst. The record will reflect the decedent's letter in full in Exhibit A. Counsel will furnish Navy certifications to the clerk. My father's jaw worked. He nodded as if nodding were his idea. Anything further? The judge asked. Grace looked at me. I shook my head. There were speeches in me, and none would make the day truer. Then we're concluded, the judge said. Thank you all. The gavel didn't bang. He just stood, and the room remembered how to rise. People move the way people do when a church service ends on a note that still rings. A low murmur, careful steps a hand on an old woman's elbow. The clerk removed the sleeve from the easel and offered it to Grace, who took it like a nurse takes a child, competent, tender, no fuss. Linda leaned close to my father. Richard, she hissed glass over gravel. Let's go. He didn't move. He was looking at the photograph, the way a person looks at a shoreline they'd always insisted didn't exist. He finally stood and palmed the claim check, his father's portrait, like a talisman. I'll take my property, he told the bailiff, reclaiming inches of a world that had just measured him. I collected the journals. They smelled like wool and lemon oil, and a pen that had always known which words to choose. On top, a blue-checked recipe card poked out the corner bent. Add more butter, my mother had scribbled. I smiled where no one could see. Mrs. Olson touched my sleeve in the aisle. We knew, she whispered. Not the stars. The steadiness. Her palm was paper and heat. I squeezed back. Outside the doors, the hallway made normal noises again. A father shushed a toddler. A coffee lid hissed into place. The vending machine lit up, exact change only, like a tiny sermon. My father caught up halfway to the lobby, steps uneven. He didn't look at me until he had arranged his face into something familiar. You think this? He gestured toward the courtroom without turning erases. 20 years. No, I said. It puts them where they belong. He frowned as if the sentence were misfiled. You declined her money. She didn't leave me money, I said. She left me time. I'm giving most of it away. Magnanimous. Linda said the syllables clipped to keep them from touching anything. I looked at her, then back to him. Take the portrait, I said. Hang it where you can see it when you talk about legacy. He flinched the way a man does when he discovers a bruise he didn't know he had. Don't lecture me about legacy, he said, but softer, as if the room might still be listening. I'm not, I said. I'm declining to be part of the story where you're the only one who gets to tell it. Something in him wanted to laugh. He couldn't find the air. You always had a gift for making disobedience sound like honor. Or maybe you had a gift for making control sound like care. I didn't say it to win. I said it so the hallway would hear the words it had been owed a long time. We reached the glass doors. The rain had moved off to bother another town. The flag lay back against its pole, damp and heavy, but not defeated. Commander, the deputy said, holding the door. I nodded. My father noticed the title, then really noticed it, and his posture faltered, surprised at the way a word can rearrange a room. On the steps, the air smelled like wet iron and cut grass. People filtered down the stairs in pairs, voices low. A teen in a varsity jacket elbowed his friend and whispered, "She's the one not loud enough for show, just loud enough for hope." I wanted to tell him, hope isn't about who notices you. It's about what you notice and refuse to ignore. Grace joined me at the bottom landing. You did right, she said. Not because of the declination. Because you didn't gloat. I had help, I said, lifting the journals. She wrote the lines. Grace's mouth tilted. She always did. My father hesitated at the threshold, like a man testing a boat's wobble before trusting it. He stepped out portrait ticket in his pocket, a habit of command, rattling in search of a duty it could still shout at. Elise, he said. I turned. His eyes were raw, the way wind leaves them when you've walked too far to save face by turning back. I misjudged you. Dad? I said, and the name felt like a tool I'd set down years ago and now picked up, not because it fit, but because the job required finishing. You stopped judging me. That's different. He swallowed, and for a fraction, he was a boy in a house where apology was an animal caged in the basement. I was wrong. A small thing and not. It didn't fix years, but you can build on a plank that size. All right, I said. Not absolution. Not a bargain. Just a place to stand where there hadn't been one. Linda tugged his sleeve. He let himself be tugged. As they passed, he touched 2 fingers to the brim of nothing in particular, an old gesture from an older world. Respect missing its hat. I walked to the memorial wall and set my palm against the bronze that held a dozen names I knew and 100 I didn't. The metal was cold, then not. Behind me, the courthouse doors breathed people in and out. Beside me, Grace stood quiet, the best kind of company. You could still keep the house, she said after a minute. The clause would permit partial declination. I watched a droplet track from the top of the plaque through a letter A and off the bottom curl. She wanted light in a library, I said. I want that too. Grace nodded. Then we'll build it. We stood there long enough for the cloud to move and a brightness to edge the courthouse bricks. The day didn't get easier. It just got honest. That's enough. I tucked the journals under my arm. I'll take a drive this afternoon, I said. Past Marsh Road, past the school, then out to the point. To say goodbye, Grace asked. To say thank you, I said. Goodbyes are for endings. This felt like a beginning. The coastal cemetery sits on a bluff where the wind never quite runs out of things to say. Midweek late afternoon, the light leaned low, turning the white stones into a quiet audience. Flags the size of handkerchiefs ticked at their sticks. The bigger flag at the gate tugged against its halyard and then gave up with a sigh. I parked by the maintenance shed, killed the engine, and listened to the gulls draw lines in the air. I carried only 2 things, the journals tied with twine and a single medal wrapped in a handkerchief. Not a showy row, just the one she'd once brushed with her thumb and said, I like the weight of that one. It looks honest. Her stone was near the cedar that leans east, as if the tree itself remembered a storm, and decided not to stand up all the way again. The inscription was plain, Margaret Ellis Morgan, with 2 dates and a dash that held everything. Someone, Mrs. Olson, probably had tucked a sprig of rosemary into the vase. I set the journals down and placed the medal at the base, then straightened a corner of the grass the mower had missed. The sea breathed in and out steady as a sleeping chest. Hey, Mom, I said, and it didn't feel strange. If anything felt strange, it was how normal the word sounded after the courtroom had pried so many other words out of their hiding places. I told her about the rain, about the way the judge capped his pen like a man who respects endings, about Grace's voice finding the balance between truth and mercy. I told her I'd declined the house and the accounts and how the clerk's eyebrows did a little surprise dance before she remembered the law doesn't have choreography for generosity. I told her Willow Creek would have lamps for girls who needed a table and a book and a pair of eyes that saw them. You did that, I said, and a gull made a sound like a laugh if you've never heard laughter. I heard footsteps before I saw their owner. Gravel has its own language. These steps changed weight halfway in, like a person deciding between leaving and arriving. I didn't turn until the steps stopped. Is it all right? He said, not a question he was used to asking if I... Stand a minute. I let the wind answer for me. He took that as permission and came to the other side of the stone. We faced the water like 2 people at a railing who chose different ships. His suit wasn't new. The shoulders had lost their brag. He held nothing in his hands, which made them look unsure of themselves. His hair lifted in tufts the wind found without asking. For the first time in years, he looked like a man whom weather had touched. "I brought nothing," he said, glancing at the medal, and then away, "because I have nothing that belongs here." We stood the gulls stitching the air, the rosemary letting go of a little smell when the wind brushed it. A fisherman's truck rattled down the road and out again. The world continued as it always does when you think yours has stopped. "I thought shame would keep you small," he said finally. "No prelude, no footwork." I was wrong. I kept my eyes on the horizon line. "Shame never built anything," I said. "It only burns what's left." He let that sentence live where it landed. Too many times we tried to outtalk the truth. The truth always won when we let it. "I read the record," he said, quieter. "All of it. The citations. The commendations." He stumbled over the word like a man stepping onto a moving walkway he didn't know was there. "I used to tell juries that paper is just paper. Then I learned to make it mean something. I suppose you did too." "It's not the paper," I said. "It's the life underneath it." His mouth tugged almost a smile, almost a grimace. "Yes." Wind worried the little flags. Down the row, a woman in a quilted vest brushed leaves from a marker and kissed her fingers and touched the name. Grief is mostly maintenance, the small work of not letting what you love be swallowed by weather. "I should have said things when they would have been worth more," he said. "You were 18. I was. Whatever age a man is when he decides performance pays better than love." "You were my father," I said. "That's the age." He nodded, a movement that looked expensive on him. "I chose the wrong currency," he said. "I kept thinking I'd get a better exchange rate later." He swallowed. "There is no later." We listened to the flag rope knock the pole. A boy on a bicycle coasted past the gate, looked in, and chose not to enter. Some places tell you when you're not invited, and you're grateful they did. "I don't know what to do with the portrait," he said. "I took it home. I hung it over the mantel, the way you'd hang a verdict. I sit across from it, and it looks at me like I used to look at you." "Maybe that's the point," I said. "Let it look until you learn to." "To what?" "To see." He rubbed his jaw. The wind found his eyes. "I'm tired of not seeing," he said. "It takes a great deal of energy to be a wall." "You don't have to be a wall," I said. "You can be a person." He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh if we'd earned laughter yet. "That sounds smaller." "It isn't," I said. "It's heavier at first, then it's lighter forever." He nodded again, slower. He looked at the name on the stone. "She forgave me," he said, and the sentence wobbled, but didn't fall. "She did," I said. "Is that enough?" he asked. The wind snagged his tie and laid it flat against his shirt like a hand saying hush. "It's enough for both of us," I said. "I don't have a better mercy to offer than the one she already spent." We stood until the light slid another inch down the cedar. A line of pelicans flew across like old men keeping pace for one another. He put his hands in his pockets and took them out again as if his body were trying to unlearn a posture. "People keep asking me how I didn't know," he said, not looking at me. "About you. About all of it." "What do you tell them?" "That I decided a long time ago what counted," he said. "And then I counted only that." "That's one way to stay right," I said. "It's a lonely way," he answered, and the answer felt like something he hadn't rehearsed. We let the quiet come back. It wasn't the courtroom quiet, the kind made of evaluation and breath held like a bet. This was the kind you get on a bluff where the ground has watched enough to know when to speak and when to listen. "I can't make it up," he said. "Not to your mother. Not to you." "No," I said. "You can't." He took that the way a man takes a wave he can't duck. He wiped his cheek and pretended it was the wind. "What do I do then?" "Go to the library," I said. "Write a check. Show up on Tuesday nights and shelve books. Learn the names of the kids who come in after the diner shift because the house is loud. When you talk about legacy, let it be the thing you do quietly when no one asks you to." He grimaced like a man tasting medicine. Then he nodded. "All right." We watched the water change its mind about color 3 times. He cleared his throat. "I won't be good at this," he said. You were very good at the other thing, I said. Maybe that's not the compliment it felt like. He had the grace to wince. Elise, he said, and the name shook something out of both of us. I was wrong. There it was, again the plank. Not a bridge yet, but something you could cross if you were careful and the weather held. All right, I said. I didn't step closer. I didn't step away. I let the distance be what it was earned, honest, workable. He glanced at the medal. She liked the weight of that one, he said softly, and the memory met me like warm water. He smiled small and true, said it looked honest. She was right, I said. He put 2 fingers to the top of the stone, a salute reduced to touch. Thank you, he told the name. He meant more than the estate. He meant the letter and the lamp and the permission to stop pretending the house he'd built was anything but stagecraft. I'll go, he said after a minute. You should have your time. We left together, which felt more honest than him leaving first or me staying to make a point. At the gate, he paused under the big flag and let it shadow his face. The wind will take a while to change, he said. It already has, I said. You're just feeling it. He nodded, once grateful and ashamed, and something braver than both. He walked to his car with the stride of a man who had decided to keep walking even when the path didn't applaud. I went back to the stone and reclaimed the metal, smoothing the grass where it had pressed. I did what you asked, I told her. No more, no less. A skiff cut a white seam across the bay and then stitched it back together. I stood there until the shadows made long arrows toward town. When I finally turned to go, the rosemary let go one last breath. I took it with me. Salt cedar, a hint of lemons from an old pan that had done its work long after anyone thought it handsome. At the car, I looked back. He had reached the bend in the cemetery road and without flourish removed his hat and placed it over his heart. Not peace, not yet, but a truce, the size of a gesture which, like all beginnings, is how people with our history start. By November, the air along the Norfolk waterfront finds a sharper edge. Ships lift out of the dawn like black cutouts, horns low and patient, and gulls work the wind the way old sailors work rope by feel without hurry. The Vet Center had asked me to speak at their annual gathering coffee and paper cups sheet cake, with too much frosting rows of folding chairs that wobble until the first story steadies them. I arrived early and helped a retired corpsman set out programs. He wore a ball cap pinned with the kind of modesty that only comes from having earned what you don't have to name. Good turnout, he said, peeking at the door. They like when it's not speeches as much as remembering. I can manage remembering, I said. He grinned. So I've heard. By the time the clock on the wall clicked to the hour, the room was a quilt of America nurses, with careful hands, Marines who sat ramrod straight until a joke slouched them, a sailor in a chair with tennis balls on its feet, so it wouldn't bite the tile, an old coastie with a laugh that took the ceiling up an inch. In the back, a row of teenagers fidgeted in hoodies. A church lady set a slow cooker on a card table and lifted the lid to let chilly steam become part of the invocation. The director introduced me, without embroidery, Rear Admiral, lower half Elise Morgan. The title landed like a pebble, dropped in a pond, circles quiet and real. I stepped up palms flat on the lectern and breathed 4 counts. In, hold, out, hold. There are 2 ways to speak in a room like this at people or with them. I chose with. I won't give you the long version I began. You know it anyway because most of us have lived some version of it. A family that didn't fit the mouths it was given. A house where loud tried to pass as strong. The kind of silence you learn to carry like a second spine. Heads nodded. Someone murmured, A heater clicked on. Realized we didn't need it and clicked off again. I stood in a courtroom this fall while a letter my mother wrote put the truth where even pride had to read it, I said. There was also a photograph attached that surprised some people. It didn't surprise me. Not because I expected anything from her, from the town, from the court, but because a photograph can't do anything but testify. It doesn't create a reality. It records one. I told them the short of it, the will, the envelope, the caption block. that wouldn't be argued with my decision to decline the estate and send most of the remainder to a library in Willow Creek, where my mother had once found a lamp when the house was small. I didn't give them the word no. They didn't need spectacle. They knew the sound. What I learned, I said, wasn't about medals or ranks. It was about definitions. We called control care. We called quiet weak. We called legacy permission. We were wrong. An old Navy nurse in the second row dabbed under her eye and nodded not at me at the sentence. A teenager in a hoodie stopped fidgeting. Here's what the service taught me, and what my mother finally said out loud so the law would have to hear it. I went on. Honor isn't something you inherit or demand. It's what you practice when people aren't looking. Forgiveness isn't a loophole. It's a decision to stop renting your life to anger for one more month. And legacy is a verb. You do it or it isn't there. I could have ended there. The director would have been pleased the sheet cake would have cut easier, and people would have gone home warmed by agreement, but my mother's letter had not been polite, and I owed her the same. I leaned a little closer to the microphone, not to make my voice bigger, just nearer. My father came to the cemetery, I said. We stood on either side of my mother's name and looked in the same direction without pretending we had earned a different one. He said 3 words. I was wrong, and here's the educational part. If you want one, those words don't rebuild a house. They do set a foundation. You can lay a life across that if you want to. A quiet fell that wasn't sad. It was the kind people make when they've put down their fork and decided to listen with both hands. At the library in Willow Creek, I said, Tuesday nights are volunteer nights. I went last week. A man who looked like he'd been good at the wrong thing for a long time was there labeling spines and learning to alphabetize again after years of filing people by how they made him feel. He didn't grandstand. He just put the right book in the right place. A kid came in with a backpack and a look I recognized from a mirror I don't keep anymore. He asked where the biographies were. The man walked him there and said, Pick 2. Come back next week and tell me if either one helped. That's legacy. That's what a verb looks like. A hum moved the room agreement with a little ache in it. The corpsman leaned into the aisle and said, Amen, like a man who'd never used the word lightly. I told them small things, that the hearth, the shop I'd helped open near base, brewed coffee strong and let people sit as long as they needed. That we kept a jar near the register labeled lamps, and the money in it went to Willow Creek for bulbs and books and whatever else made seeing easier. That my mother's journals were on a shelf in my living room and I read 1 page a night aloud, not because anyone else needed to hear, but because reading turns memory into air you can breathe together. I didn't talk about my father's portrait on his mantle where he sits across from it and lets it look at him. Some sentences you save. Some sentences you live until they don't need saying. When I finished, I didn't ask for applause. The room gave it anyway, the kind you can fold in your pocket without creasing. People lined up along the wall, not for autographs, just to place a palm on my forearm or put a sentence into my hand. My grandson said a man whose cane had more character than some congressmen. He thinks loud is the only way to be heard. My daughter, a nurse, said. She joined and I didn't clap at first. I'm the teenager. The teenager said, surprising himself by grinning. I don't have a library. Where do I go? Here, I said, pointing to 3 women from the church who ran a tutoring night in the fellowship hall. And Tuesdays, Willow Creek if your gas money can stretch. We'll find rides. On my way out, the director caught my sleeve. He came, he said quietly. Sat in the last row, left when you started shaking hands. Didn't want to take anyone's place in line. I turned. The back chairs were half folded, a navy cap resting on the end one. Sun through the high windows made a pale coin of its brim. I felt something in my chest unclench 1 more notch. Not because I needed him to be proud. Because showing up is a kind of sentence too. Outside the water took the light and learned a new color. I walked along the rail until the wind untied the last of the day's knots. A boy on a skateboard kicked past wheels, rattling a rhythm I hadn't heard since childhood. 2 retirees argued cheerfully about whether you salt chili. A ship shouldered its way out of harbor slow and sure, the way you leave a place you're grateful for without thinking you own it. I lifted my phone and typed a note I've carried as a pocket order ever since. When in doubt, light the lamp. When still in doubt, read the name slowly. When doubt persists, bring coffee and sit until a story tells you what kind of help it needs. If you've come this far with me, if you've stood in a quiet room and felt old definitions loosen, if you've carried a silence longer than the people who gave it to you, consider this your invitation. Call someone you've been fair to in your head and stingy to in your actions. Volunteer at the place in town that turns noise into reading. Tell one person you were wrong. Tell one person they were brave. If this story steadied, you share it with another set of hands that needs steadying. And if you want more rooms like this, more stories about honor practiced and forgiveness chosen, I'd be honored if you'd stay. Pull up a chair next time. Bring a friend. Leave with something lighter than what you came in carrying. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose one small verb and repeat it until our house learns a better language. Tonight, mine is simple light. She's the mistake I wish I never made. Dad told the cousins over Thanksgiving dinner. Everyone laughed until someone pointed at the TV. Wait, is she shaking hands with someone? Another voice rose, thin and shocked. Oh my God, that's our president. My father's fork hovered. Then he choked on his turkey as my face filled the screen beside the commander-in-chief. Everything paused. Football went mute. Even the chandelier seemed to listen. The old instinct to make myself small scratched at my ribs and died there. I kept breathing steady and steady out. The anchor's voice, drifted Colonel Emily Carter recognized, for advisory work with veterans' families. The Chiron did not brag. It simply told. Around the table, laughter emptied itself and ran out. Dad coughed into his napkin, eyes fixed on the TV as if a glare could rewind tape. A spoon rang against a glass and then went shy. My cousins blinked, not sure which weather to dress for. You knew, Aunt Linda whispered, forgetting my mother had been gone 10 years, and that I stood 2 chairs away. I do a lot of planning, I said. Quiet professionalism? Do the hard things, speak softly, get your people home. Across the table, Mark, my son. My best yes met my eyes. I gave him the smallest nod. We're fine. Dad scraped his chair back, rose like a foreman about to fix a mistake. Folks, I was just having a little fun. The familiar refuge of a joke. If you object, you can't take one. If you laugh, you're drafted. I'd like to finish my plate, I said, looking at the cranberry sauce as if it were a horizon. Boring sentences can land a room back in its chair. They sat. Football murmured again. Knives resumed their harmless work. The president's handshake looped once more in the corner of my eye and then vanished into weather. Colonel Cousin Josie breathed soft as a hymn. I gave her the same nod I'd given Mark. It's all right. We'll keep this safe. Maps live in the bones of people who grew up with public jokes. You learn the exits, the voices that carry the distance between mercy and a microphone. You store your heat low, near the heart, not the face. Pass the rolls, I asked. Aunt Linda handed them over like a peace treaty. Butter spread clean to the edges. Solvable things first. Why didn't you tell us Dad asked, testing my name like a tool he didn't know how to hold? Because a uniform on a family table turns into a prop. Because in this house, a ribbon becomes a punchline. Because privacy is armor when applause costs dignity. I've been busy, I said. There wasn't much to say, both true enough to pass inspection. Grandpa Mark said gently, maybe we just eat. He has my mother's steady eyes, the kind that settle a table without touching it. Dad lifted his glass. To family, he announced too loud. People echoed because manners. Remember their steps, even when feet forget. I raised my water. Water has returned more soldiers than speeches ever have. The rest of dinner drifted onto safe, glossy topics. Football flight prices, the pie recipe that never fails until it does. I carried my share light. Thanksgiving isn't a tribunal. It's a test of patience, of recipes, of character. The grades come later when the dishes are done. After pie, the cousins dissolved into the living room. I washed plates to the rhythm of steam and running water. In the window, the TV's reflection showed the handshake again, a highlight reel I had not ordered. A chair scraped behind me. Dad's voice came low. You made us look foolish. I set a plate upright in the rack and let the faucet talk. He waited. Bullies need the audience to turn toward them. The failure to turn is its own refusal. I didn't make anything I said. I stood there. You could have warned me. About my own life, I shut the water off and faced him. Gentle even, or about your joke. He flinched. The world can take years to deliver a mirror. When it finally does, it isn't decorative. From the doorway, Mark offered a lifeline. Grandpa, the game's back. Dad took it muttering about officiating as he retreated. I exhaled and turned the water on again. The faucet resumed its good work. By 9 coats and goodbyes crowded the hall. Aunt Linda squeezed my hand the way churchwomen do when words would only rattle the plate. Come by tomorrow, she said. I made too much sweet potato. In this family, love sneaks in as leftovers. On the porch, the air tasted like metal. The sky wore winter low. Mark stood beside me, hands in pockets like he used to when he wanted courage without asking for it. You okay? He asked. I am, I said, and I'm proud of you. For what? For lowering the temperature. He smiled small. You taught me that. Inside, someone laughed too loudly at something that wasn't funny. It didn't catch. Maybe the room was learning. My phone buzzed on the table. Messages, missed calls, the local paper, a retired teacher. Proud of you. Sorry about your dad. I slid the phone into my bag. The truth didn't need replies tonight. It needed to keep standing. At the curb, Dad's truck idled, tailpipe ticking. He stared through the windshield like the road would turn into a question if he blinked. For a second, our eyes met in the glass. He looked away first. Let's head home, I told Mark. Gravel ground under our shoes, the anthem of getting on with it. I started the car, turned the heater. 1 notch checked mirrors. The house glowed behind us, a warm rectangle. You can love a place without living inside its weather. Mom, Mark said as we turned out. Yes, if he calls tomorrow. If he calls, we'll listen, I said. And we'll decide. The turn signal clicked choices with rhythm. Snow finally committed light as forgiveness that hasn't learned its full weight. At home, I set my phone on the nightstand. It buzzed once more, a name from years ago, Staff Sergeant Miller. Ma'am, we saw the footage. We've got your 6. Sleep well. I did. The morning after Thanksgiving smelled like coffee and flowers that had given up. Vases lined my counter the way parade floats line a small-town street, tilting a little tired, still trying to be beautiful. I wrapped a dish towel around my mug and stood by the window watching a sparrow bully a blue jay off the feeder. Size is a poor predictor of victory. I learned that early. I grew up on a 2-lane outside Chillicothe, Ohio, where people know the mileage of every truck and the price of baled hay by season. Dad ran a plumbing and HVAC outfit from a cinder block shop behind the house. In summer, he smelled like copper and sweat. In winter, like furnace dust and a kind of tired he mistook for virtue. He was good with systems and rough with people, especially the people who lived under his roof. If a pipe leaked, he tightened it. If a child hurt, he mocked it. That was the method. Sundays were polished pews, under a stained glass window of wheat and water. Afterward, Dad would shake the preacher's hand and pronounce the sermon tight work the way he'd praise a clean solder joint. In the parking lot, he'd squeeze my upper arm like he was checking a melon and say, "We're laying off the donuts this week, right?" The men laughed like it was locker room ribbing. The women looked away. Humiliation loves a parking lot. By 5th grade, I was big. Not the biggest in town, but big enough for the jokes to land. Mom tried to sand them down with casseroles and kindness, the old arithmetic, where women patch everything with food and apologies. She loved me out loud. He cut me down in public. Those 2 forces canceled each other until I felt like 0. It took me years to switch to a different math. I learned to be useful. I stacked fittings, swept floors, balanced invoices on a yellow legal pad. Dad relied on my neatness while ridiculing my body. You'd be perfect if you came with a shutoff valve, he told me in front of a supplier. I pretended not to hear. Pretending is a skill. It buys time until courage grows. In high school, I ran cross-country in an oversized t-shirt. My times were average. No applause. Just breath and grit. The guidance counselor slid an Army brochure across her desk senior year. "You're organized and stubborn," she said. "Those go far." Organized and stubborn were the first words that felt like compliments, not conditions. At dinner I said, "Army." Dad said, "Quit." He chewed with his mouth open and did a drum solo with his fork. "You'll fold the first time a drill sergeant yells." Mom pressed her napkin to her lips, the way women plug leaks with linen. Silence was safer than siding with a child. I signed the enlistment papers on my lunch break and hid the carbon copies in my geometry binder. The day I shipped out, Dad stood with his thumbs in his belt loops like a foreman of the world. "Try not to embarrass us," he said. I lifted my duffel and didn't look back. On the bus, farms blurred into factories into a base with metal beds and shouted schedules. The cadence in my head changed from Dad's running commentary to a drill sergeant's bark, and somehow that felt like mercy. The sergeant didn't know my history or my body. He only cared if my boots were shined, my bunk was tight, and my time beat yesterday's. I could work with that. Work is a refuge when worth has always been contested. Boot camp liked neatness and stubbornness. So did the Army. I learned to measure a room without moving, to fold a map one-handed, to keep my voice low and let it carry. Promotion came the way dawn does, gradual, then obvious. Private to specialist, specialist to sergeant, officer track, captain, major, lieutenant colonel. The work wasn't grand. It was 1,000 small reliabilities read the route. Make the call. Get your people home. You can do almost anything if you focus on the next right inch. Iraq first heat that made your skin feel stapled on, sand that found its way into letters. Then Afghanistan mountains that punished you and men who would follow you if you proved you would count on yourself. We lost some. We brought more back than we lost. I kept a tally I never wrote down. Quiet professionalism, do the hard things, speak softly, carry your people. It fit the shape of me better than any dress ever had. When a private called me sir by accident, I didn't correct him with a speech. I said, "Ma'am's fine," and kept moving. Authority that needs an announcement is a house that needs a brace. I married once briefly to a man who liked the idea of service until he had to share a house with the clock it runs on. He left when Mark turned 3. I learned how to be two parents without turning praise into a scoreboard. I taught Mark to tighten a faucet and make his bed on the same day. We kept the house tidy. Tidiness is a mercy when life is loud. When Mom's heart failed, I flew home in Class A's because there was no time to change. The pews were the same. So was the wheat and water. Women I'd known since childhood squeezed my hands and said, "Your mama bragged on you something fierce." After the service, a neighbor asked about my uniform. "Just office work," Dad said before I could answer. She files papers and tries not to break a sweat. I took a casserole I didn't need and went inside. After that, I stopped bringing uniforms home. Jeans, cardigans. I gave Dad a silhouette he could live with. The less he knew, the less he could use. Between deployments and duty stations, I stitched a life like a good hem flat, strong and visible from a distance. I helped write policies nobody reads until the day they save somebody. I signed promotion orders that lifted people like levers. I wrote condolence notes with a pen that shook, then learned to steady it. I added ribbons I didn't discuss and tucked them back into the closet. Heroism doesn't require an audience. It requires attention. I kept my family visits short and my edges soft. I learned to say work is busy instead of "I'm tired of being your target." I let Dad boast about my brother's trucks and knees and glory days. Holidays were the price of admission to a surname. I paid exactly and kept the receipt. And then my son fell in love with a bright girl from a family that collects crystal and influence. Their wedding became a test I didn't schedule. You know how that night went. You heard the line, you saw the TV, you watched the room fail and then correct itself like a bike that wobbles and finds balance. People think change happens in applause. Mostly it happens in the moment a joke stops getting laughs. My phone buzzed on the counter, now neighbors, classmates, the local paper, the church committee that runs the bake sale with military efficiency. "Proud of you. Sorry about your dad." Did that really happen? I turned the ringer off. Truth doesn't need replies. It needs room. Mark called around 9. "We're driving to the lake for a couple days," he said, voice sanded down by fatigue and joy. "You okay?" "I am," I said. "Enjoy your honeymoon sprint." He hesitated. "Mom, last night, thanks for not lighting anyone on fire." "I wasn't the one who saved the room," I said. "A few good men did." "They said you saved them first," he answered softly. "I'll call when we're back." I made the bed with hospital corners a habit that never left. I put on walking shoes. The sky tried to be blue and almost made it. Dad hadn't called. He wouldn't. He believed in inertia. I believed in a different physics. On the way to town, I passed the diner where the waitress always adds an extra strip of bacon and pretends it fell there by accident. The hardware store where the owner knows my name but says ma'am anyway, because respect is a ritual that keeps communities from rusting. I turned onto our gravel lane and parked beside the cinder block shop. The roll-up door was half open. A radio murmured classic country low enough to be embarrassed by it. Oil and old cardboard made the air thick. Dad sat on a stool at the workbench, a ledger-open pencil in his fist, like he was threatening the numbers into place. He didn't look up when my shadow crossed the concrete. He said to the page, always working as if the hour had criticized him. I stood a few feet away, the distance you use with a skittish animal or a stubborn man. "We should talk," I said. He licked the pencil and made a mark that meant nothing. "We talked enough last night," he said. "No," I said. "You talked. Then other people did. I'd like to speak now." He set the pencil down with exaggerated care, like a man setting a fuse. He didn't speak first. That alone felt like a new species of weather. The radio clicked over to an older song about trucks and second chances. A box fan rattled against its grill every fifth rotation. We had built a life on sounds like these, the hums that filled the silence while we pretended words were optional. "It was a joke," he said. Finally, each syllable tightened with a wrench he didn't quite control. "Jokes are funny to the person who hears them," I said, "not just the person who tells them." He breathed out through his nose the way men do when they're trying to blow dust off an argument. People laughed. And then they didn't. I let the sentence hang from the rafters. "That's the part I want you to keep." He picked up the pencil and put it back down. Performing competence for the ledger because he couldn't find it for me. "You never said what you do," he muttered. "You never told me." "You never asked," I said. "Not a punch. A measurement. You filled in the blanks with the story you preferred." "Military is just a job." He said it like a verdict that should end the hearing. "It is," I said. "So is fatherhood." That landed. He rubbed the hinge of his jaw as if the truth had given him a bruise. "We could stand here and bargain definitions," I continued, keeping my voice level. "Or we could make a trade I can live with." He lifted his chin a fraction. "What trade?" "You stop buying power with my dignity," I said. "In front of people, in rooms, in parking lots, and I stop bringing myself into spaces where I'm not respected. I won't bring Mark either." His eyes flickered the way a pilot flame does just before a burner decides what it wants to be. "You'd keep my grandson from me." "I'd keep your behavior from him," I said. "There's a difference." He looked at the ledger like it might volunteer a better answer than he had. The radio found a commercial about winterizing pipes. He reached to turn the volume up, thought better of it, and left the dial alone. "I gave you what I had," he said at last. "You gave me the part of you that mocks what you don't control," I replied. "And you withheld the part that names what is good and leaves it alone." We stood in the geometry of a small shop cinder block pegboard coffee can full of bolts and ashtray that had been empty for 20 years, but kept its job because habits are loyal. Outside, a pair of starlings arranged themselves on the power line like notes that didn't know the song. "Say I'm sorry," I said when he couldn't find the path. "Say you'll stop." He swallowed. The tendon in his neck made a thin, stubborn line. "What if I can't?" "Then we'll see each other less," I said, simple as a diagram. "That's the shape of it." He nodded once sharp, like taking a measurement he didn't like, but couldn't deny. "You got hard," he said, and the word held a small marvel he hadn't planned to show. "I got clear," I said. He reached for the pencil again and didn't pick it up. His hand hovered, then fell to the bench as if gravity had been reset. He stared at my hands, the way men look at tools they have borrowed and somehow grown attached to. "Those rings," he said, "I don't know what any of them mean." "Each one is a story," I said. "Not one is a joke." He nodded once. A tiny bow to a country he'd never visited, but could now find on a map. I left him there with the ledger and the old song and the new silence. The roll-up door rattled as I pushed it open, and daylight laid a square across the concrete like a clean sheet of paper. The town had its own choreography for mornings. The diner bell chimed as I stepped in. Coffee breathed from glass pots. The waitress Nora slid me the corner stool she saved for people working on hard thoughts. She topped off my mug without asking and deposited 2 extra strips of bacon on the plate with a wink that pretended she hadn't. "Busy," she asked code for. "I heard about last night, and I will not make you say the headline out loud." "Steady," I said code for. "I'm not going to crack in front of the pie case." A man in a seed cap at the far booth lifted 2 fingers in a salute that wasn't military, but wanted to be respectful. I returned it with a nod. Respect is a ritual that keeps communities from rusting. You can feel when the town oils the hinge. At the hardware store, Pete, who has known me since I was a kid, counting washers, like coins said ma'am, like it had a capital letter. He didn't ask for particulars. He carried my bag to the car, even though it wasn't heavy. The bag rustled with sandpaper and a length of weather stripping. I buy solvable things when the big ones won't obey. On Main, I passed the window of the weekly paper. The editor had taped up the front page, mock up a photo from the White House event, the handshake mid-frame. The headline, "Modest Local Colonel, Honored for Veterans Work." No exclamation marks. The town was learning. At church, the office door was open. Pastor Gene, who knows when to preach and when to listen, looked up from a stack of bulletins. "Saw you on the news," he said, like he was noticing weather. "Hard to miss," I answered. "Proud of you," he said, and then like a man, choosing his second sentence carefully, "We're glad you're ours." I swallowed. "Thank you." He gestured at the bulletin. "Potluck sign-ups are thin for Sunday. The people fear your sweet potato casserole." "They should," I said. It was a mercy he offered banter shape to carry both of us across an awkward place. Back home, I set the new weather stripping on the table and pulled the back door off its tired habit of leaking cold. Knife tape, the snug pull of something being put right with hands. The radio murmured, "The Ohio News Harvest yields a school levy, an aging water main, and small items you only care about if you live where I do. I care." The phone lit up with texts that tried to be both bouquet and apology. "Proud of you? Sorry about your dad. Is it true what they said about the convoy I let them stack? Truth doesn't need reply. It requires room to stand and be recognized." By late afternoon, Mark called from the lake. I could hear a gull and the scrape of dock cleats. "We rented a canoe," he said. Well, we rented the right to pretend we can paddle in a straight line. "Do you have life jackets on?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am." "You learned," I said, and he laughed. He sobered. "Did he say anything?" "We spoke," I said. "I said what I needed. I said a line." He was quiet, the good kind, the kind that honors not knowing what to say and not filling it with noise. "You need anything?" "I have everything I need," I said. "Go find dinner that swims." We said I love you the way people do when they've earned the right to keep it simple. Dusk settled. The house put on its soft edges. I boiled noodles and ate standing over the sink because ceremony isn't required for nourishment. Out back, the feeder saw a détente. The sparrow and the jay took turns. Mercy can be practiced. By 8, the street had gone neighbor quiet. A dog barked once, declarative, then remembered itself. I turned off the porch light and stood in the doorway a moment, letting November touch the bones of my face. The air held that clean metal taste of snow thinking about it. When I stepped back inside, the envelope was on the mat. No stamp. Hand-delivered. A plain white that looked like hospital sheets. My name in block letters, careful. I knew before I opened it who had written it. The handwriting of men who learn to print a certain way in the service becomes a second uniform. I carried it to the table and sat. The flap lifted without tearing, like it understood the job. A single page slid out. Ma'am. It began in pen that had pressed hard enough to make a second ghost sentence on the back. Staff Sergeant Miller here. We saw the footage. With respect, thank you. For that night. For a different night long ago. For not letting the room get smaller. There was a second sheet wrinkled like it had spent time in a pocket. A photograph printed on cheap paper. 4 young men in dusty smiles, a woman with her hair pulled back, all eyes squinted against Afghan light. I don't keep many photos. I keep faces in memory, the way you keep maps folded ready. The letter continued. Lewis taught his kid to ride a bike last spring. He sent a video to the whole platoon group chat. He said to tell you the wobble straightened out right where you said it would. With respect, we've got your 6. If you need us to stand in a different room, say the word. I laid the letter down like it contained something that could spill. Across the yard, the neighbor's porch light clicked on, then off. Somewhere, a screen door shut with a soft apology. The house felt steady. That's all I've ever asked a house to be. I folded the letter back into its skin and set it under the magnet that holds the grocery list. Salt, coffee, weather strip for the frame by the sink, standards, not speeches. The phone vibrated against the wood, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it pass to voicemail. Then I didn't. Hello, I said. There was a breath, a throat cleared. There's a service at the Veterans Memorial on Saturday, Dad said. They're dedicating a new plaque. I could stand there with you. He let the sentence wobble in the middle like a bike finding balance. Okay, I said. We let the line go quiet. Mercy refuses to audition. 6 o'clock, he said. I'll be there, I answered. We hung up like people who had agreed on a blueprint they weren't yet sure they could build. Outside, the wind shouldered the house and then decided not to fight it. Saturday would come bright if Ohio kept its promises. Saturday arrived bright, the way Ohio sometimes apologizes for winter sun like a clean sheet wind that remembered how to be gentle. The Veterans Memorial sits on a square of grass between the library and the post office granite, warmed by names flagpoles clicking their halyards like a patient metronome. Boy Scouts in sashes stood in a line that tried hard to be straight. A retired teacher pinned a small flag to a coat and smoothed it twice the way you do when you don't have control of much, but still believe in neatness. I parked on Main and walked the last block. Boots on sidewalk, coffee in hand. I don't wear a uniform to these things unless asked. Today I wore a dark coat, a quiet scarf, and a hat that kept the wind from making decisions for my hair. People nodded, the respectful kind, not the curious kind. The town had been practicing. Dad was already there, which means he'd come early and circled the block to pick a parking spot that let him leave fast if he needed to. His tie was quiet. He stood with his hands inside his coat like he'd misplaced his pockets and didn't want help finding them. He saw me and did not wave, which in our language meant he didn't want to make me do the math of a public greeting. Progress is sometimes subtraction. Morning, he said when I reached him. Morning, I answered. We stood side by side the way you do when history has to be carried and you can't risk dropping it by moving too much. Pastor Jean offered a brief prayer without trying to improve it with flourishes. The mayor kept his remarks short, bless him, said the names right. Didn't pretend he knew the stories behind them, didn't call sacrifice content. Then the drum corps from the high school did its level best to make cadence sound like a backbone. A thin man with a clipboard stepped to the mic. We'll unveil the plaque, he said, and then if she would, we'd be honored to hear from Colonel Carter for 1 minute. I don't love microphones, but I won't let a town carry a thing alone. I stepped forward as 2 scouts pulled a nylon cover away from a new rectangle of granite dates, a line about service you've heard before, names that made shoulders straighten all over the square. I put my hand on the edge because stone deserves to be treated like a person when it holds names. The clipboard man lifted the mic toward me. 1 minute, he whispered, grateful that I'd save him from the kind of speeches that make small crowds smaller. Thank you, I said, voice even. Quiet professionalism is the idea that we do the hard things, speak softly, and get our people home. Today isn't about telling stories that weren't ours to live. It's about standing still long enough for the names to be heard. If you knew one of them say their name at supper. If you didn't thank someone who did the work you didn't see. And when you tell your family who you are, do it without borrowing dignity from someone else. That's all. It wasn't poetry. It didn't need to be. People clap the way you clap when you want the sound to be careful. Dad's chin lifted a fraction. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. We had agreed to stand together. We were doing it. Afterward, the square rearranged itself into knots. A Boy Scout shook my hand, like he'd been practicing on doorknobs all week. A woman in scrubs balanced a toddler on her hip and said thank you in a tone that tried to be light and landed honest. Pastor Jean handed me a pamphlet about the church potluck and whispered, "No sweet potatoes, I swear," and I said thank you for safeguarding the congregation. "Ma'am," a voice said behind me, and the shape of it told me who it was before I turned. Staff Sergeant Miller stood with two men in the posture of people who have carried weight together. They wore civilian clothes that fit like they'd been hemmed by a wife or a sister who knew where to put a shoulder seam. One of them had a scar that slipped into his hairline. The other wore his watch on the right. Useful details if the day changed its mind. "Miller," I said. "Ma'am," he said, and his mouth found a smile that wasn't for cameras. Dad, discovering manners he hadn't had much cause to use, put out his hand. "I'm her father," he said. He left out the rest of his usual titles: foreman of the world, judge of worth, keeper of the family's punchlines. "Thank you for, well." He ran out of nouns. Miller shook his hand once, firm enough to register, not enough to bruise. "With respect, sir," he said, and the phrase did a lot of work. We were under her command in Coast Province. Dad's eyebrows tried to pretend they didn't know where that was. Geography is a mercy. It lets you ask questions without admitting you're lost. "Coast," he said. "Not ocean," the scarred man, Dotto, offered with the small irony of men who have explained this more than once. Spelled Khost. Dad nodded like a student who's decided he can learn the alphabet if he tries. What happened?" Miller looked at me for a beat. "Not permission. Alignment." "Say what you'll say," I said. "Keep the edges where they belong." He faced Dad, but spoke to the air between us the way you do when you're memorializing something you owe more than a paragraph. Convoy went quiet. Comms down. Dust so thick the morning couldn't get in. We had a route, and then the route had us. He glanced at Dotto, who took the handoff. "People think bravery is running," Dotto said. "Mostly it's walking steady." Ma'am did that. Truck to truck. Put a hand on a shoulder, eyes on the map. We relearned how to breathe by matching hers. Miller's jaw moved, once the way some men push a memory back into a shape that lets it be told. "Lewis, he's got a little girl, thought he was done. She told him he wasn't. We got home. He taught that kid to ride a bike, right where she said the wobble would straighten out." I kept my face still, because that's what you do when a room is being asked to carry weight and you don't want to tip it. Dad didn't find a joke. Thank God. He looked at me like I'd participated in a trick, and then realized it was the opposite. "You went truck to truck," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a recalibration. "It was a short walk," I said. "And the right one." He nodded. Something uncoiled in his shoulders and left room for air to get in. The retired teacher approached with a program and a pen. "Would you sign?" she asked, eyes kind, not greedy. "For my grandson. He's thinking ROTC. "Only if I also sign the back," I said, flipping it. I wrote, "Tell the truth when it would be easier not to." She pressed the paper to her chest, the way people hold a letter they haven't opened yet. On the edge of the square, the high school drummer dropped a stick and blushed. The sound was so small you wouldn't notice it unless you knew how loud a dropped stick can feel to the person who drops it. The band leader nodded at him like it was nothing. The boy breathed again. Miller shifted his weight. "We should let you two be," he said. "Ma'am, call if you need a room to get quiet." "I know," I said. "Thank you." They faded into the flow of townspeople, their bodies undecorated. Now their bearings still correct. Ordinary men again. That's the point. Dad and I started toward his truck. He matched my step without crowding it. "You cold?" he asked. It was a ridiculous question. The sun was doing its best. I told him no anyway, because sometimes you answer what a man means, not what he says. At the curb, he stopped. His hand went to his tie, smoothed it, found he didn't need the gesture. "I've been mean," he said, almost conversational, like he was choosing a brand of nails at the hardware store. "Most of my life." "You've been afraid," I said. "Mean is how afraid dresses for work." He huffed. It wasn't a laugh. It was a little puff of air that conceded contact. "You going to fix me?" "I can't," I said. "I can draw a line. You walk across or you don't." He tapped the truck bed with his knuckles, metal on bone. "All right?" We stood a minute longer, not to make a scene, just to let the sun write this on our shoulders. The square began to empty. The scouts broke formation and became boys again. A woman in a green coat approached hesitation, bundled with her courage. She had a man's square jaw softened by kindness, and a tote bag that said "Library" in big letters. "Colonel Carter?" she asked. "I'm Lewis's wife. He's at work. He said if I saw you." She stopped, breath snagging on feeling. "He said to tell you he keeps the training wheels in the garage anyway, for when our kid wants to go fast, then forgets how to be brave for a second." I nodded. "That happens," I said. "Bravery forgets. It remembers." She handed me an envelope. He wrote. He thought well. He thought saying it plain might help. I took it like it contained a fragile thing that needed my steadiness. "Thank you." She squeezed my hand once and let go as if hands were radio towers. Dad watched the exchange without commentary. It might have been the most respectful thing he did all morning. We parted at the corner. He gestured with his chin toward the diner and said, "You want," and then stopped, recognizing the foolishness of asking a woman to sit next to the mouth that had cut her in public before noon. Another time, he settled on. "Another time," I said. At home, I set the envelope on the table and did not open it right away. Some letters you need to earn with 10 minutes of doing the dishes first, so your hands remember how to hold something that isn't yours. When I finally slid a thumb under the flap, the room felt like a chapel. The paper inside was thick, as if weight could keep words from blowing away. "Ma'am," it began, "I don't know if you remember the taste of the dust that day. I do. It's what I taste every time I get scared and ride past it anyway. You taught me that fear is just weather. Standards are climate." I read it to the end and put my palm flat on the table. The wood was warm from the patch of sun the window had been saving for me. The phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Tomatoes." "Okay," it read. From a guy at the shop. With salt? He hadn't signed it. He didn't have to. I set the phone down and looked at the letter again. Then I went to the kitchen window and watched a sparrow and a jay negotiate the feeder like diplomats who'd both learned a new language. Saturday had done its work. Tomorrow would ask for more. 2 days after the memorial, the town settled back into its regular rhythm like a clock that had been wound and set on the mantle. Mail came at 11:30, coupons, a seed catalog, a hand-addressed envelope with an out-of-state postmark, and my name printed in careful block letters. I left it on the kitchen table while I wiped the counters and rinsed a coffee mug you could have called clean already. Some letters you open with your hands steadier than your heart. It was from Chaplain Reynolds, Afghanistan, then Fort Sill last I knew. "Colonel," he wrote in pen, the color of a well-used hymnal. "Saw you in a small clip shaking hands at the White House, which is not the point. This is." He had underlined the sentence twice. Quiet professionalism is not silence. It's stewardship of people, of standards, of rooms that would otherwise be bought with someone else's dignity. You kept that room at the wedding from being purchased with yours. The letter closed with a benediction that didn't try to be pretty. I let it sit open, a little cathedral in blue ink. I made a sandwich and ate it standing over the sink. The memory of halyards knocking flagpoles still ticked in my chest. Saturday had done its work, and now Monday wanted me back in rooms at a desk, returning emails, shepherding projects that never make the paper, but keep someone's weak from breaking. I wrote a recommendation for a sergeant ready for more, and approved a policy change that would make leave easier for a young corporal who'd just become a father. The work doesn't clap for itself. It shouldn't. In the afternoon, a card slid through my front door. I recognized the stationery cream with a hairline navy border. Jennifer's lawyer handwriting, "Thank you for not making me the villain, even when the room invited you to." On a second line, smaller, "I'm still learning." I set the card beside the chaplain's letter. 2 sentences that pulled in the same direction. A knock rattled the screen door near dusk. Dad stood on the porch with a grocery sack clutched like a concession. "Tomatoes," he said, as if that explained everything. "They'll spot the counter," I said reflexively, because there are old languages it's safe to speak. He held up a folded paper towel. "I brought insurance." I let him in. He set the sack down, produced a salt shaker from his coat pocket, a flourish that would have been a joke once, and now was simply preparedness, and lined up tomatoes like small red decisions. He glanced around, seeing if my house had changed since he'd last been inside pretending it hadn't ever been a place where he made the air dangerous. It hadn't changed. I keep the house tidy because tidiness is a mercy when life is loud. "Guy at the shop gave me these," he said. "Said they're good." I reached for a knife. He reached faster. "I'll do it," he said, as if peeling a little duty off my day might count as currency. He cut the first slice too thick and corrected the second. We ate standing up at the counter, sprinkling salt both of us, pretending to search for the perfect ratio when what we were really doing was practicing not hurting each other with conversation. "Copper's up," he said like a man who trusted market prices more than emotions. "School levy passed," I said. "Kids'll keep their buses." He nodded his face, doing the math of taxes and outcomes. "Saw pastor," he added, as if brevity might make the myth of normal stronger. He didn't talk much. "He's good at choosing between sermons and silence," I said. We finished a tomato in the sort of quiet that isn't empty, just careful. He wiped the knife with the paper towel like it was a tool that deserved clean edges. About Saturday, he began, and then stalled as if his mouth had found a hill it couldn't climb without changing gears. "You stood there good." "I stood still," I said. "Sometimes that's enough." He nodded. The gesture looked like a man accepting the width of a board he didn't choose, but still had to cut straight. His eyes landed on the chaplain's letter and Jennifer's card. He didn't read them. He wouldn't. But he recognized paper that wasn't junk. "People write you a lot," he said. Sometimes I answered. Most of the time they don't, and that's fine. He tapped the counter once with his knuckles the way men test wood for rot. "I'm not good at this." "You don't have to be good," I said. "You have to stop." He ran a hand over his hair as if the right part might deliver him a better line. He started, then exhaled. "I'm mean. I learned it young. Worked for me." "It didn't," I said, steady. "It worked for your fear." He didn't argue. He didn't know how, which is not the same as agreeing, but it's a doorway. He pulled another tomato from the bag as if contrition could be measured in produce. "There's a cookout at your brother's Sunday," he said, eyes on the cutting board. "If you go, I'll keep my mouth shut." "I'm not asking for silence," I said. "I'm asking for respect. They're not the same." He swallowed. "I can try." "Trying is a start," I said. "Standards are what you do on the second day." He nodded a small stubborn tilt, as if we'd agreed to meet at the same mile marker from different roads. We finished the tomatoes. At the door, he paused at the screen and eased it open so it wouldn't slam. "Consideration is a dialect. I'll take fluency later. For now, I'll take vocabulary." After he left, I washed the knife and laid it to dry on a dish towel. I sat with the chaplain's letter again and let it do what good words do, build a small bridge in the mind between where you stand and where you mean to be. I pulled a pen from the drawer and wrote a reply. Stewardship. I remember. Thank you for naming it without making it heroic. I slid the envelope into my bag. It could ride with me until I found a blue mailbox that still believed in sentences delivered on purpose. On Tuesday, the paper ran a modest column on the memorial, a photo of scouts' names, spelled right quotes, short and serviceable. The editor added one line near the end. Tell the truth when it would be easier not to. C. Carter. He gave me an initial, which I appreciated. Women don't always get their full names in print unless they bake for it. At the grocery, a woman I didn't recognize touched my sleeve. My grandson's thinking, ROTC, she said. I told him, do the hard things, speak softly. She smiled like she'd borrowed that line and intended to return it in better condition. I told her it wasn't mine, and she said it is now the way small towns adopt lines, the way they adopt strays. Wednesday brought a different envelope, the government kind, official and unsentimental. A note about an advisory panel I'd agreed to help steer. A reminder to submit a report that no one would quote unless it failed. A thank you so spare, it left room for the work. I filed it and poured coffee. You don't hang certificates for doing the job, you do the job. Thursday. The phone rang with a number from Dad's shop. The new kid over-tightened a valve, he said, without hello, which in his dialect meant hello. Learned humility the honest way. Those lessons hold, I said. He says he's sorry when he messes up. That helps, I said. It doesn't undo, but it helps. There was a pause. I'm sorry, he said, and then blew air through his nose like a man who'd stuck the landing on a short jump and couldn't believe his knees still worked. For the microphone. For the years. I held the phone like it might spill. Thank you, I said, because we were not going to make a parade out of this. Sunday's cookout is at 4. 4, he repeated as if the clock could hold him steady. Friday evening, I stopped by the church office to drop off a pan of mac and cheese that would offend no one and comfort some. Pastor Jean held the door with a file folder and said, deadpan. Heard you're single-handedly keeping our potlucks doctrinally sound. I'm keeping them edible, I said. Doctrine is above my pay grade. He smiled. You're doing fine with both. The walk home took me past the hardware store and the diner. Nora tapped the glass with a coffee pot and mimed pouring me a cup. I pointed to my watch. She mouthed tomorrow, and we made a promise of caffeine and pie with our hands. At home, I pulled the screen door open slowly so it wouldn't slam habit learning from example. I set the table for one without apology. You can have a table set for one, and a life that seats many. I lit a candle, not because I needed atmosphere, but because light knows what to do with a room. Saturday folded itself into chores laundry, like a parade of cotton squares floors that learned the lesson of clean a grocery list that included more tomatoes. I wrote a short note to Jennifer. Thank you for your card. Starting again is a skill worth practicing. I addressed it to a house where kindness and calculation probably shared a bathroom. People can learn to let kindness have the bigger closet. In the late afternoon, I walked the block and a half to the blue mailbox. The chaplain's reply, Jennifer's note. A donation check to the memorial fund all slid in with a soft, decisive rattle. I rested my palm on the metal a moment. Standards, not speeches. On the way back, I passed Dad's truck idling at the curb in front of my house. He sat behind the wheel with both hands at 10 and 2, like a man who had decided not to take his chances with any more improvisation. He rolled the window down 2 inches. Sunday, he said. 4, I replied. He nodded once. The engine clicked as it cooled. He didn't say proud. I didn't need him to. He put the truck in gear, pulled away without making the tires speak for him, and lifted 2 fingers off the wheel in a salute he'd borrowed from a seed cap man who'd borrowed it from a town that had started to understand how to hold its people more gently. The next day would be a backyard, a grill, and a circle of men who told the same 3 stories every time charcoal met fire. I didn't know if Dad had new words. I didn't require them. What I required was conduct. We would see. Sunday at 4 smelled like charcoal and cut grass. My brother's backyard filled itself with the usual fixtures, folding chairs that pinch if you sit wrong, coolers sweating onto the deck, kids launching a doomed campaign against ants with plastic shovels. Men gathered around the grill as if it were a campfire that required the same 3 stories in the same order the time the mower wouldn't start, the time the river came up fast, the time somebody's team almost mattered. I parked on the street and let myself through the side gate. The screen door had been propped open with a bag of Ice Ohio ingenuity. I carried a bowl of macaroni salad because mercy should arrive in a dish no one can argue with. Jennifer waved from the picnic table with the polite relief of a woman who knows a family can survive anything if enough mayonnaise is involved. She made room beside the deviled eggs and patted my arm like an ally who's still learning the map. Dad was by the grill tongs in hand, smoke writing its own letter around his head. He wore a baseball cap with the logo of a company that no longer exists. Nostalgia sells a lot of hats. He saw me flipped a wing like punctuation and came over. His face looked like a man checking the studs behind drywall before he hangs something that matters. "This is my daughter," he said to the circle of men who had turned to inventory me. He didn't smirk. He didn't tilt his head toward my body like it was something to be measured. He set the tongs down and found the sentence he'd been practicing. "She runs things bigger than this grill," he said. "She takes care of people. That's all I'll say." It wasn't poetry, and thank God for that. The men nodded the way men do when they've been handed a rule they can obey without losing face. Someone said, "Ma'am." Someone else offered a paper plate. The conversation rerouted itself around weather and fuel prices. The grill hissed its approval. I didn't smile big. I let the sentence pass through me and settle where relief goes when you've trained for it, but never expected it to show. Jennifer's father, who wears cufflinks to a cookout, because dignity to him, has threads lifted his beer in my direction with an expression that said he was willing to be taught by events if they insisted. My brother tossed me a set of tongs and said, "You want to take over the vegetables?" I said yes, because you should say yes to solvable things. Dad and I worked the grill shoulder to shoulder. He faced the meat. I kept the zucchini from falling through the gaps. "Heat's hotter on the right," he said, "the kind of advice you give when you're practicing not giving the other kind." "Got it," I said. The aluminum tray sang a little when the juices hit. We pretended to listen to it instead of ourselves. Cousin Tyler wandered over, the one who likes to test fences for weak posts. So he said, "Grin already waiting for company? Are we, saluting at desserts now?" He looked at Dad, expecting a laugh. Habit asked for it. "The room, if you can call a backyard." A room looked there too. Dad wiped his hands on a towel and took a breath I recognized. The first word of a joke rose to his lips, and then sat down. He let it go. "We're eating," he said. "Try being decent with your mouth full." He handed Tyler a plate like a truce and turned a drumstick over as if it had absorbed the whole exchange. Tyler laughed the way a man laughs when he's been kept from jumping a ditch he thought he owned. He took the plate and left the fence alone. Small victories hold better than grand ones. You can nail them to a day and hang things from them later. Kids began to orbit the dessert table. The older ones negotiated the cut lines for brownies like diplomats who understood the Geneva Conventions of frosting. Someone's dog remembered it was bred to beg and began fulfilling its destiny. On the deck, a Bluetooth speaker decided to be a radio and found a station where the commercials were as comforting as the songs. We ate too much. We said no thank you to a second hamburger and then accepted half a hot dog, like discipline could be split into fractions. When it came time for toasts, a family disease, we were spared. My brother lifted his plastic cup and said, "To a quiet Sunday," and the crowd applauded in relief. They meant it. Quiet can be a standard. Dad drifted toward the shade and practiced being unimportant. It fit him like a new jacket, stiff, hopeful, in need of wearing. He watched the kids get sticky and the men take credit for meat that had cooked itself, if we're honest. He didn't hunt for a microphone that wasn't there. He didn't raise his voice to see if it would echo. He let the afternoon be ordinary, and that was the work. Later, while people loaded paper plates with a final negotiation of beans and regret, the bowling league contingent arrived late, shoes in tote bags, like passports. Bill, who never meets anyone's eyes, because life taught him not to, sidled up to Dad and said, "Heard your girl gave a speech." Dad kept his gaze on the grill and answered so softly the tongs had to lean in to hear. "She didn't give a speech," he said. "She gave a standard." The phrase landed on the deck and stayed there. Bill nodded twice, like a man measuring a lane. I moved folding chairs to the garage with my brother muscle memory from 100 events that left the same indentations in the same patch of grass. "He's different," my brother said, adjusting his end without making a declaration of it. He's practicing, I said. We'll see if he keeps it. We stacked the last chair. I washed my hands at the utility sink and watched the water run brown with ashes and something else you can't name. When I came back out, Dad stood near the gate with a jar in his hand. Pickles. Of course. Neighbor gave me too many, he said, like contrition can be brined and shared. Leave them on the porch, I said. I'll return the jar. We can call it, even he tried. We can call it started, I corrected. Sunlight went long. People carried leftovers to cars like trophies from a hunt that hadn't hurt anything. The youngest cousin fell asleep under the picnic table and woke up convinced he had teleported. Jennifer hugged me a little too hard. I think she was hugging a future in which our families learned to share oxygen. As we were saying goodbye, Dad tapped my elbow with 2 fingers, a signal older than I am. You going to church tomorrow? He asked. I am, I said. You? He nodded. I'll try not to park where I can block anyone in, he said, and I smiled because a man who thinks about other people's exits can be trusted with their entrances. That night, the house wore its soft edges again. I set the pickles on the counter on a paper towel so they wouldn't spot it. I poured tea. The phone buzzed a video from an unknown number. I pressed play. A little girl on a bike wobbled down a driveway, training wheels, a breath from the pavement. A man's voice, Lewis coaching from behind the camera. Right where the wobble wants to scare you, you keep pedaling. The bike steadied. The kid whooped. The video ended with laughter that sounded like somebody's new weather. I held the phone the way you hold something warm you didn't light yourself. I thought of rooms and how they learn. I thought of standards and how they stick. A message followed. We thought you should see. With respect, thank you. No signature. Didn't need one. I set the phone face down and turned off the kitchen light. The dark reached out and shook my hand like a neighbor. Tomorrow would be Sunday. A parking lot would test us the way parking lots do under a sky that forgets and remembers in the same breath. We would either hold the standard or we wouldn't. The thing about standards is simple. You know when you've kept them. I went to bed without rehearsing speeches. I wasn't going to need one. Sunday came on soft feet, choir warm-ups drifting through brick, the smell of coffee stationed like a sentry at the fellowship hall. I parked by the maple that always sheds first and walked the familiar sidewalk past the bulletin board where bake sales and blood drives share staples. Inside the sanctuary held the modest hush of a room that knows what to do with names and need. Pastor Jean greeted at the door with a squeeze of the forearm that said without words, "You are held here, and not because you're interesting." I slid into our usual pew, third from the back left side under the stained glass of wheat and water, the same window that had watched me at 12 at 22 in Class A's at Mom's funeral, and last winter when Mark sat beside me and tried to pretend he didn't cry at hymns that remember people. The organist found the right key by feel, and then by faith. People settled like leaves picking their spot. 2 minutes before the service, Dad entered and chose a seat at the end of my row without demanding it. He didn't look at me, which is how you look at someone when you're trying to give them room, even as you move closer. He held the hymnal like an instruction manual, except this time he seemed willing to read it. When the congregation stood, his knees made a small complaint and then quieted. The sermon was about speech, James the tongue, like a rudder small and decisive. Pastor didn't stare at us when he read it. He read the text as if reading a blueprint that builds better rooms. Let your words bridle your pride and free your mercy. I don't know if that's the verse. It's what I heard. Dad listened in the posture of a man leaning on a counter that doesn't wobble. I could almost see him trying on sentences like jackets. After the benediction, the parking lot did. What parking lots do, it turned into a town square without benches. Men compared knees, women compared recipes, kids compared pockets full of acorns and lint. A bowling league acquaintance walked up to Dad and pointed his chin at me. Heard your girl gave a speech, he said. Dad didn't smile. He allowed the sentence to arrive, breathe once, and then corrected it gently, the way you'd redirect a child's hand before it tips a pitcher. She didn't give a speech, he said. She gave a standard. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't have to. The man nodded like someone who had found a stud behind the drywall and could now hang something heavy there. Good, he said, and moved on with his coffee. A teenage usher in an ill-fitting blazer approached with the bravery manufactured by a navy tie and a grandmother's pride. "Ma'am? Colonel ma'am," he said. "My ROTC application's due. If you had one sentence." "One," I asked. He swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "Do the hard things, speak softly, and get your people home," I said. "And don't buy laughter with someone else's dignity. It never spends well." He breathed like a man who had been given permission to be decent. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and backed away into a life that would test him often and offer him chances to keep his feet. We walked to the cars, Dad and I, at a pace that honored how long it takes a habit to loosen its grip. He stopped at his truck and put his hand on the bed rail as if greeting an old friend. I said I was sorry, he said like a man, checking whether paint had dried. "You did," I said. "I'm going to keep saying it," he added, "but less, and I'll do it more." "Good order," I said. "Actions before announcements. Standards before slogans." He looked at my hands. "You wearing any of those rings today?" "No," I said. "I don't take them everywhere. They're not for shops and pews. They're for rooms where they tell the truth about what they mean." He nodded, a student content to miss a day of show and tell if it meant the class learned to stop teasing. He cleared his throat. "You want lunch?" he asked, and then corrected himself. "Or can I bring you a sandwich? Leave it on your porch." Not ring the bell. The offer wore training wheels. I let them stay. "Turkey on wheat," I said. "Mustard. No lecture." He grunted. A laugh would have ruined it. "All right," he said. "No lecture." In the afternoon, I changed the porch light bulb and tightened the loose rail that had been threatening to make decisions for visitors. Fixing small things reminded my hands how to make a room feel safe. The mailbox clanged with a modest Sunday delivery, a note from the editor of the weekly paper, a man who once misspelled my name and apologized like he'd dented a church bell. "Appreciate your sentence about telling the truth. We're making it a little sign by the coffee machine. People read what's near the pot." I brewed tea and stood by the window that frames the feeder. The sparrow and the jay worked out a schedule that would never make the news. Mercy practiced is more durable than apology advertised. At 4, a brown paper sack arrived on my porch and a truck idled at the curb long enough to count to 10. Sandwich chips, a small jar of pickles with a note in Dad's block scrawl. "If you return the jar, I'll live." I put the sandwich on a plate because dignity can be served at any table. I ate it slowly, tasting turkey and a quiet that hadn't always lived here. Mark called from the lake on speaker water, clucking against the dock. "We're back tonight," he said. "How's Grandpa?" "Practicing," I said. He exhaled a smile. "You?" "Practicing," I said. "Standards are just practice kept longer." Evening came without drama. I took a walk past the memorial, reading the names the way you read a recipe you'll never cook but want to honor flour, salt, courage. At the library drop, someone had slid a spiral notebook into the return slot with a sticky note. "For the Community Stories Project Anonymous. Chillicothe contains multitudes hauling lines and book spines and a choir that can carry an off-key alto into a chord that holds." Back home, I put Dad's jar on the counter. I didn't put a paper towel under it. Trust is a risk. Let it spot the counter once. I washed the plate and put it in the rack to dry beside a mug that says in fading letters, "Steady is a kind of brave." The house grew quiet around the edges. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't need to see myself shake the president's hand again. I needed to see myself hold a smaller one tomorrow, my own, when I reached across a table to a man who had learned late that words are hammers. I sat down with a pen and a card. "Dad," I wrote, "thank you for the sandwich. I'll return the jar. I'm willing to keep practicing as long as you are. Here are my terms written so we can both be sure. No public jokes at anyone's expense. No private ones about my body. Ask before telling my story. I'll answer plainly when you ask. I will make room for you when you use that room well. E. I sealed it and set it by the door with my keys. Standards fit in an envelope. They also fit in a mouth that's ready to say I was wrong and then act like it. I thought about the people who would hear this story in their cars, at their kitchen tables, and headphones, while they walked a block where the lampposts know their names. Older Americans who have lived in rooms where laughter bought power and dignity paid the bill. I thought about the grandchildren who will inherit our standards and our excuses and choose which to keep. Here is the truth that wants to be said plain. The greatest revenge is not the wine that sprays across white linen. It's reconciliation lived in a way that teaches the room to behave. It's a father learning to open a screen door slowly. It's a daughter refusing to trade a microphone for a mirror. It's a town deciding to clap for care instead of spectacle. It is a standard anyone can practice quiet, exact American in the modest ways that keep a place from coming apart. If you've walked with me to the end, I'd like to ask a small thing that matters. Think about your words this week at a table in a parking lot at a counter with a ledger on it. Ask whether they build or break. If this story gave you a way to say something better, share it with someone who needs it. If it reminded you that dignity can arrive late and still arrive, subscribe and stay. We tell these stories not to scold, but to steward, so that in 1,000 ordinary rooms, honor becomes the climate and cruelty the weather that passes.